Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. How do you feel about colors? Do you feel something when you see them? Certain ones. Do you find them intriguing? Or think nothing of them at all? Many believe that colors have meaning, and psychology says that they evoke feelings that cannot be denied. Like we're pre-programmed in a way that causes certain colors to speak to us more than others, positively and/or negatively. Let's take the color red, considered one of the stronger colors, symbolizing many different things: life, health, love, but also war and anger, courage and danger. So, which is it? Can something mean or represent more than one thing? Opposing sides even? Well, sure. So why not colors too? Of course, in the case of tonight's episode, red serves as only one thing, a warning, and one that shouldn't be so easily dismissed. The kind of red flags that, if you ignore, you may not survive. So, let's get started, shall we? This will probably be the only place I'd ever be comfortable telling this story without the fear of judgment. You don't know me, and I don't know you. I'm telling this story in its fullest, as there's nothing to hide in this relationship between us. I retired early last year as an industrial electrician. If you lived in the lower Hillsborough County within the past 30 years and ever used electricity, you can thank me for maintaining the switchboards, generators, panels, transformers, and basically anything else that doesn't run off of solar energy. The job meant I was responsible for handling any emergencies that would spontaneously pop up needing fixing. These emergencies I'd have to get up and tend to at all hours of the night, during dinners, birthdays, even my daughter's kindergarten graduation. A transformer had blown up 30 miles in Bexar County. My cell phone goes off and I'm embarrassed having to leave. But it is what it is. You gotta be on your toes and always thinking forward. I'm saying this because if I would have retold my story to my crew or higher-ups, I probably wouldn't be receiving a retirement check. We were out on a job on I-93, near the old Wyndham Rail Trail. A storm had knocked out some power lines, and we were down assessing the damage, figuring out what vehicles and tools we need to call in. My bladder was full from all the coffee I'd been consuming, and I decided to take a little hike away from the crew to enjoy nature's restroom a little more privately. I didn't walk too far, but after relieving myself, I heard one of the linemen shout my name from further in the woods. At first, I was genuinely confused and thought that they were messing with me, because when I left the group, they were all standing by the work truck. But then the voice starts screaming, "Help, help, I'm hurt." Nobody on the crew would ever joke like that, so I start running towards this voice, even though I'm sure everybody was present at the trucks when I'd walked away. A couple of paces forward, I realized my utility belt was back at the truck. It had everything from my radio to a flashlight, but the screams and the pleas I was hearing, they were loud enough for my immediate attention. So I kept on forward. Every so often I'd have to stop and recenter myself because it would sound like the calling was coming from a different direction. Minutes would go by before I'd stop again and figure out that I had no clue how far I'd gone or how to get back. I felt so stupid for getting myself lost and apparently running around in circles trying to locate this injured lineman. It was a humid night, and the sweat burned when it got in my eyes. When the cries for help started up again, it sounded like they were on my left. I didn't instantly take off in the direction this time. I was trying to catch my breath. A few seconds later, another scream echoes through the forest, but it's coming from a completely different direction. Then again, directly in front of me. This time, it sounded closer. Sticks and leaves began to crunch and break, each moving closer to me. I stand my ground. But then, 20 feet ahead, I can actually see the brush being pushed around. I look down, and I see two big red eyes, like a couple of hot coals blinking in the dark. The eyes were closer set, like human eyes. It was a clear night, and the bright moon made it easy to clearly see a woman on her hands and knees, hiding in the bushes. When she stands up, she's fully nude, and scars cover her skin. I take a step backwards, but for some reason still ask, "Are you okay?" It makes a strange noise that sounded like a nonsense word in a human's voice, like, "Yo, no." I took another step back, and it quickly crouched back behind the bushes. A sense of absolute dread consumed my body. I turned and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Somehow, by the grace of God, after running for I don't know how long, I can see the work truck's headlights in the distance, and I follow them out. When I get back, everyone's upset that I'd taken so long. The truck engine was on because they thought I'd gotten lost. They were about to start searching for me. One of the men asks if I was taking a shit, and my brain is still on overload from what I'd just experienced, so that's my best excuse. I tell them, yeah, sorry. I couldn't find any good leaves for toilet paper. By the time we get back to our lot, my incident is long forgotten about. I think it's better that way. My wife really likes this channel and wanted me to send this story in. The bus was running later than usual last night. The bus stop's only a few blocks from my apartment. When I get off, I'm about to cross Park Road. I see another person standing on the other side of the crosswalk. The roads are clear. I've already started walking across towards the person. A few seconds later, the green pedestrian symbol turns on, but they still stand still. Big trench coat with a red fez on his head. As I got closer, I saw the trench coat open up, and what looked like two little arms reach out and pull the sides closed again. I stopped right there in the middle of the crosswalk and just stared at this guy for a second, hoping to make sense out of what I'd just seen. His head was small for his size. His face looked bloated, like he'd been stung by bees. His eyes were barely visible, but I could tell that he was staring back at me. I reasoned with myself, we're all different sizes and shapes. I'd just never seen such disproportions on a human before. I felt rude for starting to walk diagonal towards the sidewalk. Then it happened again. The wind catches the trench coat and it opens. Inside the coat were two more sets of eyes, reflecting, blinking, looking at me. Two of the arms quickly grab both sides of the coat and close them again, like curtains. I spin 180 degrees and sprint back across Church Street, then take a left down Hillside Avenue and back up Reese Road. I ran a big square around the block so that I could get back in the right direction. When I get to the end of the street, I can see down to the intersection I was previously on. The corners are now empty. I got shivers thinking whatever I'd just seen followed me when I turned around. I ran the whole way back, ignoring crossing signals. No cars were out. When I'd gotten home, I told my boyfriend about what I'd seen, and his mouth dropped. He told me his dad described the same trench coat guy a couple of months ago. Both of his parents saw it driving home after a movie late one night. Red fez, bloated face, long trench coat. They didn't see what I saw inside, though. His mom said it had tiny feet. 3 up-close sightings of this thing. I know there has to be more, but where else would you bring this kind of information? So please, if you live near Montford and this story sounds familiar, let me know. Me and my boyfriend have taken a couple of trips up and down Park Road to see if we can catch a glimpse of it, but we haven't yet. We've got our cell phones ready. He's even got a little spotlight rigged up on the side of his car. When we catch him, you'll be the first to know. I guess most would consider it common sense to be careful about online hookups and that rule applies to everyone. But I'll be the first to admit that being a woman who dates other women, I'd never really had genuine safety concerns in the online dating department. Sure, some women have used heavily edited photos, but I don't exactly live in a place where the lesbian dating pool is thriving. And no woman has ever tried to rob or kidnap me. At least not until this last time. I met a hot ginger named Becca, and we hit it off on a level that I hadn't experienced. We did the whole chatting online and on the phone daily for almost a month before we finally made plans for a real date. I've never really been a serious relationship type of gal, so it actually was kind of a big deal that I wanted this to happen. I was so nervous that I disregarded about a dozen red flags along the way. We lived about 2 hours apart, so we chose a restaurant in the middle and planned to meet at 7:30. This meant we should have left our respective apartments by 6:30, yet she didn't even call me until 7:15. I'd already gotten us a booth by then. She explained her car wouldn't start, and when I asked why she waited so long to call, she launched into an explanation of how her brother was to fix it, but not having much luck. She sounded near tears, and I was fully consumed by the desire to make her feel better. Before I knew it, I was offering to come pick her up. I already hoped to end the night at her house, so why not skip a few steps? But then, it apparently would have saved me 30 minutes if she went home with her brother, and I drove to his house instead. I should have been extremely suspicious with all of the plan changes, but I reasoned that she was just nervous about me. Of course she wanted her brother around. I could have easily turned out to be some kind of psycho. I thought the GPS was taking me on some kind of weird shortcut when it wanted me to turn off the main highway onto some small country road, barely big enough to call a 2-lane highway. But Becca confirmed that was the only way there. She said I'd only need to follow it for 2 miles, and then his driveway would be the last one on the left before the old wooden bridge. It sounded simple enough, and I'd already gone so far. I called her back after going 3 miles without seeing a bridge, and she apologized some more. She's just awful with directions. She should have let her brother tell me. You know the drill. Well, to cut a pointless part of the story short, my dumbass drove another 30 minutes and called 3 more times before I saw the bridge. I had expected a normal house and driveway, but this looked like a 1-lane gravel road without streetlights. The road was pitch black before I got my headlights on it, so again, I called Becca. And this was the first time my spidey senses finally tingled. She assured me that it was just a long driveway and to keep going, but when we were about to hang up, she swore and complained their power had just gone out. In an attempt to comfort myself, I made a joke about being afraid of the dark and asked her to wait outside so I didn't have to go into the scary house. She hesitated a bit longer than I expected and said that she needed a few more minutes to get ready, that I should come in and have a drink while I waited. I didn't like that at all. And I was so nervous that I hadn't realized how ridiculous it was that she would need more time in her brother's dark house after she should have been ready before leaving her own home. I decided to drop all pretenses. I offered to turn on my brights so that she could get a good look inside the car and the trunk and whatever else she needed to feel safe. But things were playing out a little too weird for my own peace of mind. I genuinely expected her to laugh and agree, but she became noticeably irritated and said that she couldn't believe I didn't trust her, that she thought we were past such ridiculous paranoias. Basically, she was guilt-tripping me, just to throw me off while I was already confused. I finally agreed to come inside, just so I could have some time to think before pulling up. But then she wouldn't let me off the phone. She started talking about all of the fun things we were going to do, and heavily implied that we would likely end up back at her place anyway. That's when alarm bells really began whistling. 1 second it sounded like she wanted to call off the whole night, and the next it sounded like she was waiting to jump into my arms the second I crossed the threshold. I got desperate then and didn't really care if she knew I was faking it. I just wanted to think, nothing more. After coming to a slow stop, I used an old peppermint wrapper to create a static noise in the phone, and when we played a few rounds of "Can you hear me?" tag, I went to hang up then, but at the last second, I muted her instead. She called out a few final hellos before breathing out a frustrated sigh and speaking to whoever was with her. "Don't worry, she's coming inside, but we gotta hurry. The next one's only..." That's when she hung up. But that's all I needed to hear. I wanted to turn around right there, but the ditches on either side of the driveway were so steep that I'd never get out. If I make a mistake, it was over. If it hadn't been such a long way, I might have tried to reverse out, but straight ahead was my only real option. I thought I was going to puke the whole time I was turning around, and I nearly did when Becca began calling the second I didn't stop. Obviously, I didn't answer. All I cared about was escaping. She called 4 times and sent a string of increasingly hostile messages before giving up. I was so paranoid of being followed or found through online breadcrumbs that I drove to the police station. But her profile was deleted by then. Still, I'm glad I went. It turns out a girl from a few counties over had gone missing under similar circumstances the previous month. The address they gave me was to a house that had been empty for years, hence the sudden loss of power. And there was enough evidence left behind to indicate that there had been more than just 2 people waiting inside. Needless to say, I'm done with online dating, at least for a while. I live in Washington, but I don't want to say exactly where I was in case anyone tries to go there. I can't be responsible for that. Until recently, I never believed in Bigfoot or anything like that, because I've been camping at least 5 to 10 times a year for over a decade without seeing anything remotely unusual. I don't just go a few miles into the woods either. I hike for more than a day to get to some of my campsites. I was supposed to be on this last trip for 2 weeks, but I came back in less than 1. I got set up without any problems, but things started getting weird on day 3. I'd been fishing all afternoon and into the evening, and I started packing up my gear as it grew dark. The moment I bent over to close my tackle box, a large boulder hit the ground about 5 feet to my right. There were no cliffs or overhangs for it to fall from, so it had to have been thrown, but it weighed nearly 50 pounds. I couldn't see over the steep embankment, but I called out to make my presence known, and the only response I received came in the form of a second, larger boulder. I watched it sail through the air and land within a few feet of the first one. I thought someone must be playing with a homemade catapult and just be too far back to hear me, so I used my air horn. I was so startled by the whole thing that I didn't let go of it until my head was ringing. The silence afterward was loud in its own way, but no more boulders flew over the hill, and that's all that really mattered. Next, I went looking for the jackasses responsible, but I couldn't find any trace of other people being out there. It was too dark to continue searching, so I reluctantly returned to my camp, ate some dinner, and went to sleep. I figured whoever had been launching the rocks was scared away by the air horn and unlikely to return. But then I woke to the sound of 3 loud knocks. It sounded as if someone were hitting a tree with a wooden bat, hard. It hurt my hand just thinking about it. I heard it again, a few times later, and I went outside with my light, but I couldn't see anything. Just as I was about to give up, I heard it again, only it was immediately followed by a second set, coming from a different direction. Whatever was out there had a friend. But I was all alone. I continued searching with my light, but never saw or heard anything until the next set of knocks sounded roughly 10 minutes later. The first round came from the north again, but the second round answered from directly behind me. I'd been surrounded. That's when I went from concerned to terrified. Then something in the forest growled so low and deep that it reverberated in my bones. Until that moment, I was certain it had to be humans messing with me. But I don't know anything that could make that sound. I don't even know an animal that could come close. A second growl, just as loud and menacing, answered the first. And the sound of broken branches told me it was moving closer. In an act of sheer desperation, I threw a whole book of matches onto the fire pit. I'd left it piled high with plenty of kindling for an easy start in the morning, and it flamed up instantly. Now, operating under the assumption I was dealing with some kind of creature, I sounded my air horn and threw every branch within reach into the fire. The footsteps stopped, and when I looked in the direction they came from, I saw a massive shadow standing in the densest part of the tree line. It was so big, I thought it was the outline of several trees tangled together, until I saw the shining red eyes, nearly 10 feet in the air. They didn't move or blink. They only stared at me, and their gaze felt heavy, like a weight on my soul. I don't mean to sound fanciful or anything, but whatever was looking at me through those eyes was pure evil. I could feel it. One more gut-churning growl sounded from behind me, and I turned towards it, simultaneously pressing the air horn as I did so, and when I turned back, the looming shape was gone. I didn't see or hear anything else that night, and I damn sure didn't go back to sleep. That morning, I checked the woods around my campsite and found footprints bigger than both of my feet combined. I'd never seen anything like that. I've always been a practical person, but I can't think of a single explanation other than Bigfoot. Regardless of what I encountered, I wasn't willing to risk a second meeting. I packed my things and hiked back to my Jeep without even stopping for food. Ultimately, I made it back with just 20 minutes to spare, and I've never been so grateful to leave the woods. I'm not saying I'll never go camping again, but I definitely need some time to reassess what I thought I knew about our world. Last winter, I got snowed in at a friend's cabin in the mountains when a freak blizzard hit. I was only supposed to be there for the weekend while I finished the final edits on a novel. That in itself wasn't too big of a deal. I always over-prepared, so I had plenty of food and water. The only thing I lacked were weapons. I shouldn't have needed one. It probably wouldn't have helped anyway, but at least I would have felt some illusion of safety. It wasn't rough living out there at all. The entire cabin was powered by a beast of a generator, and by some miracle, the water pipes never froze. Under normal circumstances, it would have made for a great vacation. But Sunday night, just after sunset, I heard a scream coming from deep in the forest. It sounded like some poor woman was being killed. I called the police, but the roads were completely impassable. They couldn't even send a helicopter over until the following morning, and by then, it would be too late. I couldn't stand the thought of sitting by a cozy heater while someone was dying right outside. Finally, I convinced myself that the woman could make it to me if only she knew I was there. It wasn't too difficult to dig my way out the window. The hard part was staying out there. I yelled as loudly as I could, my mind racing for a way to find this other woman, and I became so lost in thought that I almost didn't hear the reply. A faint, distant voice that sounded strangely familiar to my own came from the darkness, but I only understood the last few words. "Is someone there?" "Yes," I shouted back, instantly full of adrenaline. With only my phone for a light, I dared not to wander in after her and have us both be lost. Instead, I called back for her to follow the sound of my voice. After a few minutes passed with no further communication, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, but then she answered again. "Hello? I'm here." I shouted louder than ever in my excitement, and soon I heard her moving through the brush. I ran a few feet into the tree line, meaning to meet her when she came into sight, but my legs nearly gave out when I saw what was actually coming towards me. I could just make out a cloaked figure. It was a humanoid-shaped patch of darkness, blacker than anything you've ever known. And in the place you would expect to see its eyes were two tiny, glowing red orbs. The greatest fear I've ever felt washed over me, and my flight or fight instinct chose to fly. I flew back into the cabin without turning back, and I had no clue if that thing was chasing me or not. I locked the door and checked every window without turning on a single light, and I waited there in the darkness. 2 hours later, I was finally beginning to relax when a set of heavy footsteps suddenly walked onto the little deck outside. They came up each step slowly, and the sharp thuds pounded in concert with my panicked heart. I knew it had to be that thing. It was impossible for anyone else to be out there. Nothing in the world could have made me open that door when the knocking started. At first, it was almost normal, like a neighbor at your door, but then it became desperate and violent. Eventually, I heard the woman's voice again. She was begging for me to let her in. The longer it continued, the more forceful the creature became. But finally, less than an hour before sunrise, it left. I heard it walk back across the deck, down the steps, and away from the cabin. When it was nice and bright outside, I dug my Explorer out of the snow, packed my bags, and nearly killed myself getting off that mountain. But I made it. By that night, I was safe and sound back in the city, where the only monsters are other humans. Apparently, I was set to be the star of a children's show that didn't even get a pilot. It was called Blow Your Horn and filmed in a little public access studio downtown. My mom had entered a contest by sending in my baby picture for an audition for the lead role of Dinah. Basically, the pilot was an educational premise where 2 adult railroad workers would engage in quirky activities while trying to take care of an infant in the Old West. It was also supposed to have puppets like Fraggle Rock or Sesame Street kind of thing, but my mom says that she never got to see an actual puppet while we were on set. I asked why my show got canceled. My mom tells me 3 things: no money, bad writing, and the set was haunted. My ears perked up and I said, "Please tell me more." She says that her and I would travel 2 hours to get to the area they had for filming. It was an abandoned slaughterhouse. It had a few long stretches of train tracks that used to transport meat from one building to another. The studio was so low budget, my mom said they had her assisting with the lights and the boom mic on the days I was scheduled to shoot. She added that I'd sleep in a box filled with blankets at her feet when they'd film outside. Blow Your Horn had a lantern theme as their primary focal point when designing the set concept. This meant that most of the scenes would be outside, so I was in that box a lot. One night, my mom had again been asked to hold the boom for the next couple of takes on the track. The shot was set up so the female lead, Mindy, would run down the tracks toward the camera, holding a lantern. She'd be coming from the dark into the light of one of the spotlights set on the track, then hit her line when she reached my mom. After being reassured that this wouldn't take all night, one of the actors gave her an uncomfortable smile, then handed my mom the box. Its innards pre-filled with blankets. Then we were off to the tracks. When we get there, my mom stays in the warm car with me until they're all set up and ready. After about 20 minutes, the director taps on the window, letting my mom know they're ready to roll film. With baby box in hand, my mom walks over a dark, icy 50-yard landscape to reach the tracks. She replaces the box in her hands with a tall boom mic, then stands next to the spotlight. In the distance, there's a lantern glowing, indicating Mindy's ready to start her run, but the director hasn't returned to the camera. My mom notices the glow from Mindy's lantern had begun to kinda drift off the tracks, heading toward the nearby woods. She thinks that Mindy's getting restless waiting for the director. I'm also in the box getting fussy, down by her feet. It was only the three of them out there, so once again, my mom swaps from one heavy boom mic to a heavy cardboard baby box and starts wandering down the tracks in search of the director. She was 30 seconds behind him from the time of him knocking on the car window to her hopping out. My mom had no clue how he could have just disappeared. A few yards down the tracks, the team had set up 3 white, fully enclosed tarps with 2 large Velcro flaps for doors. Each time after calling out for any response, my mom sets my box down and pries the 2 white sheets from each other and quickly pops her head into the dark tent before moving to the next one. But all of them were empty. Aside from random equipment and boxes, my mom shut the 3rd tent and stood in the dark silence trying to listen for any sign of human life around her. Her eyes had no chance to get adjusted to the dark when she'd been positioned so close to the only spotlight out there. As she made her way back to it, the cables that connected the camera rig together got tangled between her legs. She falls with me in her hands, but manages to turn and land on her shoulder, keeping me steady in my shell. This sacrifice of a graceful fall would save me, but leave my mom with a large gash on her elbow, along with a torn shoulder muscle. We had no medical insurance at the time, and the rage she felt began to outweigh the pain. When she made it back to the spotlight, my mom saw the lantern glow walk back onto the track. She starts yelling at Mindy to come back, and that she can't find the director. The lantern starts moving. It slowly grows as Mindy approaches, but then it goes out. My mom waits for her to enter the circle of light, but she never crossed its rift. Again, my mom started calling out to her, and when nobody replied, the tracks were quiet and still. It was the lack of sound that was the scariest. In the back of her mind, she still held out the slight chance that Mindy's trying to make a joke. But the fabric of her coat sleeve had started seeping through with blood, and she'd had enough of the night. She takes her middle finger and waves it into the darkness as a goodbye to Mindy. Then she'd make the icy, gravely climb back to her car. When she'd gotten to the main lot, the dome light of the director's car was on. He was sitting in the passenger side, his big blocky cell phone up to his ear while smoking a cigarette. The sight of this makes my mom fume. She walks over to his car and begins to yell at him. He unrolls the window, and cigarette smoke pours out of the gap. The director starts yelling back at my mom, while also yelling at the person on the phone. He says Mindy isn't showing up tonight, and told my mom to go home. She was in too much pain to continue the argument, so she just turned around and walked back to her car and drove us home. The next day, we get a message that Mindy had quit, and the director was scrapping the project. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here, so thanks so much for listening. We've got brand new episodes every Friday, and keep those eyes open long enough to find those deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks again to all of you for listening. A huge shout out to all of my patrons whom I appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. Or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.